Good morning. I have some encouraging words for you from Paul. We're going to be reading out of Philippians today. We're in the very first chapter. We're going to go to verse 15. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which shall I choose, I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary, on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you, all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus, because of my coming to you again. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. The study note says the identity of those here who preach Christ from envy and rivalry is difficult to determine. They are clearly antagonistic to Paul, and thus one could imagine they are the same Judaizing, I don't know how to say that, people mentioned in chapter 3, but it is hard to see how Paul could rejoice in the proclamation of something, namely a return to the old covenant, which he saw as a betrayal of the good news. It seems more likely that these were other Christians who preached a generally sound gospel, but were personally at odds with Paul. They may have dismissed him because of his poor speaking abilities or his constant suffering and weakness. Whatever their rationale, they were not motivated by love, but only by a desire to harm Paul in some way. But Paul, like Jesus, is not concerned for his own interests, and he will rejoice as long as the gospel is progressing. We'll go to this one. Paul's life is not a matter of seeking his own comfort or advancement. It is all about seeking the advancement of Christ's kingdom. To live is tantamount to serving Christ. In fact, to die should be seen as gain, because it would mean that Paul would be freed from his trouble-filled life on earth to rejoice in Christ's presence. Paul is hard-pressed as to which outcome he should desire. Being with Christ now would be more attractive for him, while remaining alive in the flesh would enable him to help the Philippians further on their own spiritual journey. Since Paul knows that the way of Jesus is the way of service, he is convinced that his own preferences will be put aside so that he can remain and continue with the Philippians for their progress and joy in the faith. Paul is not merely musing on his own crisis, he is giving the Philippians a model of the service-driven life. My desire is to depart and be with Christ indicates that when Christians die, they are immediately with Christ, long before their bodies are raised from the dead. As the ESV footnote indicates, the Greek for only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel can also be translated only behave as citizens worthy of the gospel, a phrasing that nicely captures Paul's play on words here. Our citizenship is in heaven. Philippi prided itself on being a Roman colony, offering the honor and privilege of Roman citizenship. Paul reminds the congregation that they should look to Christ, not Caesar, for their model of behavior. Since their primary allegiance is to God and his kingdom, they need to stand together with one another and with Paul in striving for the gospel. Paul's emphasis on unity may suggest some division within the Philippian congregation. Perhaps the disunity is one reason he mentions the overseers and deacons at the outset of the letter, 1:1, for they are required to minister in a way that promotes unity. As the Philippians maintain courage in the face of their opponents, these opponents will realize that such remarkable strength could come only from God, and thus anyone who continues to oppose God's people will be marked for destruction. Destruction, or apolia, here means eternal destruction. Hence, these are different opponents from those who are antagonized Paul, who seem to have been Christians. A different city is in view as well, for here Paul speaks about what is happening in Philippi, while in verse 15 through 18 his opposition is presumably in Rome. But God's sustaining grace and trouble will assure the believers of their own final salvation. Paul follows the teaching of Jesus here, reminding them that persecution is a sign that they belong to Christ. Troubles will come because the reality is that believers in Christ will suffer for his sake. Paul teaches that both suffering and faith are gifts of God, for both, Paul says, have been granted to you. Suffering for the sake of Jesus is a great privilege. Paul, again, holds himself out as an example of one who has maintained his joy while experiencing the same conflict, which is opposition from hostile unbelievers. I hope this encouraged you today. I love you all, and God bless.